So today I am here to bring you the second half of my August wrap up. I did read 5 books at the start of the month and only 3 in the second half. Things have really slowed down, especially in the past week. But I'm okay with 3. I think 3's an average number and I'm not devastated with it. So I'm going to get straight into this with All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. This was my YA pick for the month and it's one that I've been meaning to get to for so long and I just keep putting it off. I have to say from the off that this is the best written YA book that I've read this year. The writing was fantastic and to be honest it didn't have any really of the YA tropes that I hate so much in a lot of books. That said, it was kind of irritating because it could have been this really amazing book and it was just, there was too much going on and it was far too long. I mean, it's a pretty hefty book and it doesn't need to be, and I think it would have been better if at least 2 or 3 of the subplots had been just stripped back and we just had the basic storyline. But anyway, so it's going to be quite a difficult one to explain because there is a lot going on in this. Our main characters are a blind girl who is living with her grandfather in France when the Germans invade, and her grandfather have to flee. We also follow a character who is in Germany and he is a young boy and he gets taken to a training regiment to be prepared for the war, and we follow his journey from the training and what it does to him to be in that situation. We then follow him to France where obviously something interlinks all the characters. There is also another German man who goes to France and he is on the lookout for this precious gem which was in a museum that the blind girl's father worked at. When the Germans invaded, the museum made a few different copies of the stone and passed it to the staff members, none of them knowing who had the actual gem. So the blind girl's father has a gem that the German man who is looking for the diamonds is on the hunt for. Following me so far? Basically that's the predominant storylines. I felt as though we really could have cut out the gem thing, and I've heard other people say that as well. I think it was an unnecessary subplot and it just complicated things. It would have been much nicer if we just had the blind girl and the German boy's story. I think it would have brought the book together so much better, because there were times when I just kind of, it's so long for what it is that I just kind of started getting to the point where I really just wanted to finish it. And I think cutting back that gem story would have completely solved that issue. I also felt that there could have been a slight difference in the telling, because when we start out we are at the end of the novel and then every few chapters we go back to, we're flitting around from past to present, and I don't feel like that was necessary either. Again, I feel like it slowed the progress and I just don't think it added anything. I think it would have been nicer to have just a linear narrative. So they were really some strange narrative choices in here, but overall it was really good and I really liked the fact we got the perspective of a German soldier training, and you sort of see how he starts off really believing in what he's going to fight for and really believing in Hitler. And you just see how as people's behaviour gets more and more callous, he begins to see that it's not right what's happening. And you kind of see how he has no choice but to go along with it. I think that's a really interesting perspective to have. I always like it when books look at the German perspective of the war, because I think people forget how horrendous the war was for the German people as well. So I would recommend it. As I say, probably the best quality YA book that I've read this year. Then I read my library pick for the month, which also was a short story collection, and that is Good Bones by Margaret Atwood. I picked this up because I wanted something small, and it was really small and really quick to get through, and I have to say this was fantastic. I have not actually read any short fiction from Margaret Atwood, and I picked this up because it was so thin. I didn't fully understand what it was about because the back kind of just says it's a collection of writings, but it is a kind of really short story collection, and it looks at a few different recurring themes. So there were a few stories that kind of looked at the same thing, but the good stories were so good and most of these were pretty fantastic. So there's a lot of stories in here that look at what it is to be a woman and the role of women in not only society but also fairy tales. It looks at the way that fairy tales are written, and it was just really interesting look at gender roles for the most part. And there's also a few stories in which aliens come to Earth, and it sort of looks at the way we live and the way that society operates through the eyes of somebody who doesn't understand that. There are a few stories like that in here, but I have to say I overall really loved this, despite the repetitiveness at some points. The stories that I really particularly enjoyed was Once Upon a Time, which is sort of a really interesting sort of riff on a fairy tale. There's another one called How to Make a Man, which kind of looks at the idea of making men like you would make cakes or bake something, and I think that was really interesting as well. I have to say the reviews didn't seem very flattering for this one, but it really floated my boat. I really enjoyed it. It's so short that you're not putting loads of yourself into it, so it's not a massive investment, and I just think they were fantastic. I think the stories that were good were so good, and even the ones that were a bit weaker were still pretty good. I think a lot of people seemed to be saying that it was sort of less than you would expect from Margaret Atwood, and I could kind of understand that, but I liked that because I think these stories were simplistic, but it kind of just read to me as though Margaret Atwood was having fun, and I think it's really refreshing to have a collection that is just a writer having fun. It was a winner for me, and I would definitely recommend it. I finished the month with Zed, a novel of Zelda Fitzgerald by Therese Ann Fowler. I have wanted to read this for a very long time. I am obsessed with F. Scott Fitzgerald. So as soon as I heard that this was a thing, I really wanted to see what it was all about. I'm gonna be honest, I was pretty brutally disappointed with this. I know a lot of people seem to really like it, so it may just be me, but I was expecting a lot more and I kind of just didn't like it. I found it really boring. I'm not gonna lie about it, and I think this is why my reading for this half of the month has not been very good, because I had no inspiration to pick it up, which is really sad. So it's about the Fitzgeralds, and it looks at their life from Zelda's perspective, but it is a novel, it's fictionalised. I think Therese Ann Fowler did try to take from what actually happened in their lives. For example, the general main events in this book are from their actual lives, but like there are letters in here that they wrote to each other, and I know that there are quite good records of the letters they wrote to each other, but instead of using the real letters, Therese Ann Fowler wrote her own, and I just think it's a really confusing concept to me. I don't really understand what I could take from it. I think I would have preferred it if this was just a straight out autobiography. I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't have minded a bit of fictionalisation, but for the most part it would have been better, I think, especially if she had used things like solid events that we know happened or their actual letters to each other. But also I didn't like the way that this was written, in the fact that I feel like, considering it was Therese Ann Fowler's attempt to break the stigma on Zelda Fitzgerald, because I think there was a lot of falsehoods regarding her, and I definitely think she lived in her husband's shadow quite a lot, but I feel like her character wasn't really built on in here. Like, she does spend, and she did spend in history, time in mental institutes, but that time is completely glossed over, and I can understand as a stylistic choice why Therese Ann Fowler would choose to do that, because she has no way to know what that time was like, and also Zelda herself would have had a quite confused idea of the time. But I think we could have at least had something of her time in her mental institutes, but literally it was just glossed over, and it was kind of, oh, I went to a mental institute and then I came home. Like, that kind of irritated me, because it's like we skipped like 4 or 5 years of her life, maybe even more, to be honest. And I just don't understand why that would be a thing that would happen in a novel about Zelda Fitzgerald, you know, being institutionalised as a massive part of anybody's life. So I don't really understand the stylistic choice to skip over those years. I also feel like, even though this was in an attempt to sort of get away from Zelda being in F. Scott Fitzgerald's shadow, it very much looks at her through his shadow still. I felt like it's very much about him and what effect his actions were having on her, rather than about her life itself. I don't know, it just wasn't what I was expecting. I was confused by the layout, I was confused by the choices, I was confused by what was included in there. There were good points, The writing is good. It was interesting to read about some things that I didn't particularly know, but considering I'm a massive F. Scott fan, I thought I was going to enjoy this really a lot, and I didn't. It kind of annoyed me more than anything, and it was no more than a 3-star for me in the end. I just, yeah, I couldn't get behind it, I'm afraid. Really sad. As I say, I'm in the minority. I've only heard good things about this. Maybe it just wasn't what I was expecting. Maybe my hopes were too high for this. I don't know. It was a strange thing, and I don't know how I should feel about it. That said, I know that this is currently a series on Amazon, so I think it'll be a better series than it is a book. I'm definitely interested to watch that. I think as well this is probably a good one for the feminists out there, because though she wasn't a feminist, I think Zelda Fitzgerald kind of broke the boundaries of what was expected of a wife at that time, and it's quite devastating to see that the effects that had on her. But yeah, as a whole, I wouldn't recommend it, I'm afraid. So that's everything I read in the second half of August. Let me know down below if you've read any of these and what you've been reading recently, and I will see you next time. Bye.